How's it, guys? Welcome back to another session with Conversations with Richard and Elle. My name is Richard Grossi, and I am a life and leadership coach in Durban, South Africa. I'm here with my friend Elle, who's over in the UK. Elle, I'm going to just introduce yourself.
Hey, Rich, good to see you. Yeah, I'm Ali Gordon. I'm a high performance and leadership coach just based up in North London.
Nice. Yeah, Elle and I have this incredible passion, which is coaching and communication. And we've been chatting for a while about, kind of coaching conversations that we have, etc. And we thought, what a wonderful idea to be able to share that passion with a lot of people who might be looking for some solutions or some guidance and to kind of help them become self-coaching. So Elle and I have our own channel on YouTube, which is called Conversations with Richard and Elle. And we would love it if you guys subscribed or clicked on the little bell whenever we release new content to come and check the new conversations that we're having. So Elle and I like to kind of throw around topics. And this week we've settled on a topic called the stories that we live in and live out of, which are based on assessments. So Elle, are you happy for me to kick off?
Love to, Rich. I thought I'd just add actually that we do very little prep for this. It's a show and tell. We actually love to have a conversation, don't we? And it's not set up so that we all agree and disagree. This is just conversations we'd like to have.
100%. Yeah.
And we often disagree. But I think it's really important that anyone that's watching, this is a conversation, not something that we've just set up so we can have
absolutely
a great conversation.
No, good point. And as I've said, I'm sure within 5 minutes the viewers will be able to see that we haven't practiced this at all. Okay, guys, I'll tell you why that this topic is really quite important to me. For very personal reasons, and I'm hoping that you can identify. Well, actually, you know what? I'm sure that you will identify with a lot of them. As human beings or human becomings, as I always like to say, because we learn along the journey, is that we live in and out of stories. So when I say stories, I'm talking about assessments. So for example, I could assess something to be true where it's not a fact, it's just my interpretation of an event. And what would happen is I would take that and construct a story around my own belief. So for example, let's just say something arbitrary, like one of your friends looked at you funny, or somebody, a work colleague, said something in passing. And then at the back of your mind, you're like, no, there's something deeper going on there. And then you can't let go of that thought. And so you sit and you think about it, and then suddenly you find yourself maybe like minutes, hours. I know for me, what used to happen is I would sit in stories about things that I used to make up for days, weeks, and months. And at the end of that, I have constructed a whole reality of what my interpretation of the events were, to only realize at the end of an intense period of suffering that none of it was really true. It was just my own stuff coming forward. Elle, have you experienced anything similar with your life or your coachees?
Oh, very much so, Rich. The question I suppose I wanted to ask you is, where do you think that's come from?
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think those stories have come from?
The devil. You know what, Elle? It comes from, I can only speak for myself. It comes from my own insecurities, really, to tell you the truth. That's what comes forward in those situations, is kind of self-doubt going on in the background. There's this thing playing in the back of our minds all the time, and we tend to latch on to things that we are the most insecure about. So for example, and again, I don't give a shit about exposing like my stuff, etc. I can't say I've been the most successful in like having great, fantastic long-term relationships. I'm single again. So, one of my insecurities back then in the day was relationships. So my partner would say or do something, and I'm like, sure, jealousy steps forward. This is what's happening. I bet you this is going on. Blah, blah, blah. And it became an absolute nightmare. Horrible for me to live in, and I'm sure very horrible for my partners to live in. And thank goodness I came across these coaching techniques and tools, which allowed me to kind of step back and ask myself, all right, cool. This is your assessment, your thought, your interpretation. This is the facts. This is your thoughts. It is not the truth. My assessment is not the truth. It may be my truth, but my truth is not representative of the truth itself. So that's kind of where I started finding myself getting lost in stories.
Yeah, I agree. I suppose, yes, look, I do. I've probably got my own stories. I can't sort of think of, I think many, I'm sure, but it comes to mind, which I was having a conversation this morning with a client, and we were talking about how they were triggered with one particular person. They felt sort of bullied by that particular person. And then when we kind of had a conversation, where do you think that's from? And then, okay, so at school, bullied. And then some other things happened. And it is incredible how much we carry forward. And I know we talk about it as like it's a cliche, it's about the childhood, but it so often is. And you carry on. And I think it's not really the work often that we do is about finding why that person feels like that at that moment. And often you can sort of tread it back. There's always a thread that goes back, and it often is that 9-year-old Rich is driving the truck, or Ali is driving, the 8-year-old Ali, because we're bringing these stories
absolutely
from our childhood into our adult life. It's crazy, isn't it? We on the outside, we look all grown up and looking at our nice clothes and our nice houses and saying all the right things. But then when particular situations happen, this 9-year-old Rich pops up and starts intruding on your life. You think, where the hell have you come from?
No, 100%.
And I think that's the key, is being able to know that if this is 9-year-old Rich having this conversation,
big time,
not grown up Rich. So yeah, I totally agree with that we tell ourselves so many stories that you're right. They're true to us and their beliefs are true to us, but of course they're not the truth.
No, absolutely.
And they're very hard, obviously, to break down, because they are lived with for years and years and years and years, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Exactly that. And I always I paint this story for my clients, and I love this one. It's I always tell them, okay, guys, when I hear they're getting lost in a story, I don't jump up and be like, you're lost in a story, come on. I say to them, listen, I want to tell you a story. And I'm like, all right, cool. Red Riding Hood. You know the story of Red Riding Hood. Everybody's like, yes. They look at me a bit like, okay, here he goes again. God help us in this situation. And I say, okay, so who's the victim in that story and who's the villain in that story? And they're like, well, obviously, Red Riding Hood is the victim, and the grandmother is the victim, and the wolf is the villain. Okay, why is that? Well, he ate the grandmother, and he wanted to go and he wanted to eat Red Riding Hood. And I said, okay, cool. That is what we've been presented with. So if I said to you that, in fact, the wolf had been observing grandmother's house for weeks and had seen her taking children that came to visit her or pass through her house in the woods and inside, and she would murder them. And the wolf had seen this. And Red Riding Hood was about to go to see her grandmother, and he knew that she was coming. So he went in and ate grandmother before the grandmother could kill Red Riding Hood. Who would be the victim and who would be the villain then? And they're like, well, obviously, and that always used to love the word obviously it would be, Red Riding Hood, shame, and poor Red Riding Hood. And the wolf, what a brilliant oak, went in there and he helped everybody, and he's the victim. He's the victor in that story. And I said, can you see how stories can change within an instant if we actually know the different sides to them? So when we find ourselves lost in stories of our own stories or stories of others, because we get pulled into stories of others. I'll think about how in a working day, just conversations or whatever it might be that you have with your teammates, or drama here and drama there, or family drama, whatever it might be. We are often pulled into the stories of other people. And we are suddenly paint this person as good and bad, but we don't really know the truth. So what I'm saying is stories can change so quickly. So it's really important for us, before we start labeling characters in our stories, to ask ourselves, what is fact? What is fiction? And if I'm not able to identify the facts and I'm living in fiction, it's potentially a great idea to put that story aside and ask ourselves objectively, listen, where am I at? Who's the narrator in the story? Because if it's you, and you are painting people with all these paintbrushes, but you don't know the truth. And worst of all, we paint ourselves all the time. And so that is a big thing for me that I find, the stories that we live in and out of, because we live out of them, because often in our stories, what happens is we bring companions. We have other characters in our stories, which take the form of anxiety, depression, addiction, whatever it might be, because we just be running around in circles.
I mean, I particularly love that extreme version of a fairy tale. Rick.
Don't tell it to the kids.
I think also, just to address what you just said about identity as well, is that I think often there always seems to have to be a villain, a victim, and a hero.
Oh, yeah.
And you often hear of that in relationships. Oh, she did this.
Yeah.
That. He did this, he did that. So they then become the villain. The other person becomes the victim. And I hear this often with clients when they're sort of talking in a language, and then they want to be the rescuer or the hero in that relationship.
Yeah.
And it happens all the time because, we turn, and why do we do that? Why do we have to have, so if a relationship, for instance, is particularly tricky, why is it that we have to turn them into the villain and us into the victim? Because living in victim is such an awful place to be living in, because
totally.
You're always the villain, and then you start, and then that can turn up in your business life, your financial life, your health life, and this person is, and you're never going to have that conversation because there's a very sort of clearly defined identity in that particular relationship. So I agree, and we're very quick to tell ourselves these stories.
Absolutely.
And you're right. It's about sort of stepping back and going, actually, what is really going on here? Am I being
for sure,
or am I, or am I being the villain? And it would be nice if we were both actually the heroes of this story.
Sure.
And actually, we both stepped up and owned our stories.
I like that, El, because, also we live in so many stories. There's not just one or two that we live in at the moment. We could be living in 10. Some stories at work, some stories at home. And very often we're not actually quite aware of what's going on in our minds because it's become so second nature. So as you say, I love the fact that you bring up conversations, because what I started to do, when I came across this massive body of work of coaching, is that I started to look at the various stories I was living in and out of, and I began to address them. And like you said, in a very methodical process. Where there were stories of other people, I went and had conversations. I'll say, hey, listen, this is where my head is at. Can we chat about this? And people are so open and receptive to talking about those things and talking it through, and that's one of the key things, communication all the time with others and with ourselves, to be astute watchers of our thoughts that are going on in our minds. There's one thing I want to get across today to our listeners is just, please watch your thoughts, because they will lead to stories. And before we know it, we are literally wrapped up like a spider's web in stories. And interestingly enough, I know I'm hogging this one, but I want to tell you something quickly. I want to just illustrate the power of stories, because as our listeners do know, that I'm in addiction recovery, and I coach quite a few people in recovery, and I have a few clients who, whenever they come up to their recovery milestone date of like 6 months, a year, etc., the story that's playing in their mind before that event comes, like 2 months before, I get this, Rich, 6 months is coming up, I always relapse at 6 months, always. And that story plays and plays and plays, and true as God, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It is such a dangerous thing, because our stories will bring up emotions, which will just bring up so much for us, And what I often say to them is, okay, cool. I get that 6 months is your big time, but if I put you on an island with no clock, no time, nobody, there was nobody there to tell you what day it is, would you know your 6 months had come and passed? No, they wouldn't know. Would you be stressed? No, well, why would I be stressed? I wouldn't know. I'm like, that is the power of the story you are telling yourself. You are releasing dopamine and cortisol and adrenaline while you're living in and out of these stories. And you know what? the end of the day, I mean, come on, we're human becomings. Let's cut ourselves some slack. Let's be compassionate with ourselves, you know, like we're human, you know, come on, let's look at what we're doing and how we're living. And let's try and decrease it, because we don't need to live in fiction.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah, look, I think the key thing with all these stories and truths that we think we're having or we think we're living in is recognizing when they come up and when we feel uncomfortable and when we're responding to something is what I find really helpful is to pause. And that comes with time, obviously. It's not it's almost like a superpower that you can kind of eventually get to a place where you can pause and go, okay, what's really going on here? Why am I feeling like this? Why am I about to go on the attack? Why am I feeling why am I feeling like this? Like, what is actually really going on? Oh, this is because, you know, I was bullied when I was younger. I was called this. I felt like this. This is how my mother made me feel. You know, what's really going on in this story? And I think that is when great things can happen, because you can start to understand, oh, okay, this is my stuff coming through the other person.
Totally.
And maybe I'm misreading, as you said right at the beginning, maybe I'm just completely misreading this.
Totally.
Because I'm bringing my own story and I'm completely misreading. Maybe they aren't a bully. Maybe they aren't. They just want
potentially.
The best. So yeah, it's complicated, isn't it? I mean, it's a real situation. I think just being able to take a pause and to try and see it for what it really is, rather than what you think it is. I think
totally.
Really helpful.
No, absolutely. I totally agree. And it's a wonderful topic for listeners of this clip to actually just sit down and maybe, you know, if you want to do a self-reflective exercise, and this is what I've done, you know, often, and I still do at times. I mean, as I said, you know, we're all human, and just because Ellen are coaches doesn't excuse us from life or issues. You know, we're not living in this like nirvana of just everything is wonderful, you know, we also go through shit. But often I'll sit down and I'll be like, okay, you know, Rich, you're not feeling too lacquer, just like Els just said, it brings up some stuff. Where is this coming from? Start questioning versus accepting. When we live in a place of, you know, we just accept all of this stuff and then we start bringing it on as extra burdens on ourselves, and we'll feel within our body that things aren't lacquer. Or sorry, that's an Afrikaans term for, sorry.
What is that, Rich?
Lacquer is nice. Things aren't nice, you know, inside. Things aren't nice inside. Sit down and ask yourself, write down what is going on for me, and try and identify in those situations, because there might be many. Identify what the story is. If you want to, title the story. You know, that helps me. I title my stories at times, and then I look at what's fact, what's fiction, who are the key players, and then I look for the truth. And if my story is not living in truth, but living in interpretations that I've got based on a small interaction here or 10 seconds from there, and Elle said things coming up from childhood, I choose to put that story behind me and step forward. And through a process of systematically doing this, I cannot tell you how much freer I've become as an individual in the last 3-4 years since coaching. And it's a wonderful exercise that you can do on a weekly basis. And, you know, it's what we call in coaching is grounding yourself. Ground yourself in the truth. You know, also, I mean, like, do you have any, like, last words for the people who might be watching, like, about this topic?
Just on your part, I think that's a really great technique. I think the other thing as well is that something I do with my clients and myself actually is if something comes up, just recognize and just see what it is. And if it's sadness, we're living in a pressure cooker sometimes, and I think it's good to get it out. So just a very small exercise of recognizing if it's sadness, I am sad, and that's okay. I am sad, and that's okay. And say it as a mantra until it's released. And it actually can get emotional. It can often lead to tears, because you think, Christ, I'm really bringing up some stuff. But so you don't want to be doing it in the middle of the office. You know, it's something you can do at home, but it's also something to recognize those emotions and those feelings, and perhaps that story that you're telling yourself. And that can release quite a lot of, emotions that are sort of being pressured. And if you don't let them go, you're suddenly going to blow, and you find, what was that all about? It was never about that. It was about this and the fact you didn't deal with it. So yeah, I suppose that's something I'd love to leave the audience with. And the other one would be, they're just stories, and I think it takes time. It's not easy because life moves at an incredible pace. But if you can start looking at actually what's really going on and what your stories are telling yourself, because they may not be true, and it's just
absolutely. Just 100%. I love that. Okay, well, thanks very much. So listen, guys, Elle and I have these coaching conversations on a weekly basis. So if you enjoyed this conversation, we did one last week, please go and check that out. And if you would like to be subscribers to our YouTube channel, as I said in the beginning, and catch our stories, our conversations, catch our conversations, we'd love you to be a part of that community. If you guys would like us to talk about anything specific, just jot it down in the comments, and we will definitely check it out. So from my side in South Africa, guys, thank you very much for tuning in today. If you want to know a little bit more about me, you can check out my website on www.oio24.com. I'm also on the various social media channels like Facebook, LinkedIn, and et cetera. And I've actually also written a blog called The Stories We Tell Ourselves, which is up at the moment. So if you want any more information on this particular topic, go and read it, and allow that exercise that I mentioned earlier on, play around with it and see where you go. So where can everybody find you?
So I'm www.aligordoncoaching.com, and like you, all over different Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube now. Yeah, cool. And you can get most of that stuff you can find on my website.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, cool. Well, guys, listen, thank you very much for tuning in again, and we hope to see you soon. Okay, also from me, I'll catch you later.
Cheers, Rich. Take care. See you later.